everybody, this is Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and welcome to the 8th tutorial in the weekly tutorial series. It's been both fun and challenging coming up with cool content to do every week, but I've been pretty happy with the results so far. Today, we're going to be tackling some growth effects using vertex maps and fields and some various different techniques. We're going to be focusing on the concept sort of as if light was shining on the ground and things grow from there, but that's just the basis to create a lot of different effects, and we'll cover a couple of different kinds in this video. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D S22, and I've got just a little bit of stuff preset up here, a couple of lights just to give us some shadow. You'll see if I create a cube, there's a little bit of a kind of sunlight thing going, a little bit of blue light from an ambient light over here. In fact, I don't think I turned on ambient illumination, so I'll turn that on, get a little bit of lighting everywhere. We've got a plane set to 500 by 500 in the width and height, and then 100 segments. I then made that editable, applied this noise brown material on there to be the ground, then created a plane effector as a point deformer. We'll turn that on, and that will deform everything on Z up 25 units, and then I turned on a random field to do some variation. That just gives us a nice bumpy ground to start from. So deselecting that, we don't need the cube. That is the basis of our object. What are we going to be doing? Well, we're going to be creating a whole bunch of plants on this and growing them via some sort of a light. Let's start by creating the plant objects. In fact, not even creating them, we can get access to them directly from the content browser. I'm not entirely sure when these got added, but there's a bunch of really cool models inside of Cinema that are really great to start out these kind of techniques. I know there's a lot of different places you can buy them, you can make them. I would spend all day if I was making this from scratch myself, but inside of your 3D Objects Volume 1, I think it's in Volume 1. Nope, sorry, Volume 2, there is a plants folder. Inside of the plants folder, we got a bunch of different types here. There's one called grass elements. So we go inside there. We have a low resolution, which is what we're going to work from because we have a lot of clones. And inside here, we got different clovers and dandelions and different types of grass, live grass and dead grass. I'm going to grab every single live piece of grass. So holding down Control or Command, I'm going to click on grass 1, grass 1. That one looks nice. This one looks nice. Everything that's got some green in it. Scroll down a little. Let's grab this one, that one, that one. The more variation we have, the better. And that one. I'm not sure how many I have in total, but I'll just drag those into my viewport. And I've created a whole bunch of different grass objects, all zeroed out. They're all to scale to each other, all layered up on top of each other, ready for us to work from them. They're very, very nice and handy. So we need to make a bunch of copies of these. I'll do that by creating a cloner, dropping all of these grass objects inside of the cloner. What do we want to clone onto? Well, we could just do a grid, but we want these onto the object. We don't need the object manager anymore, so I'll shrink this back over a little bit. Inside of the cloner, changing the mode to object. Then in the cloner, I'm going to drag the ground in as our object. It's currently cloning onto the surface. We can make as many clones as we want by cranking up our count. That's way too few, so I can crank up to 1,000. We can crank up to 10,000, adding another 0. It's going to start slowing down quite a bit on us. But something that's nice is we can change our instance mode from instance to multi-instance, and it's going to calculate way quicker. If I make sure that you're in NA, the shortcut NA, so we can go to our quick shading mode, so we actually see our geometry, deselect everything, we should see all of our plants. Now, by default, they're all laying flat on the ground. We don't want that. We want them aimed upward. So in the cloner, I can go to transform, and we have to rotate on some axis. I think it's going to be -90 on P, but I'm not sure. Okay, I did get it correct at that time. They're all facing upward. They're filling this up pretty well. You can create more plants if you want to. We can also scale them up. That's an option. So I could set these to 1.5 to be larger. Maybe our scene should be, the ground could be smaller, but, I think this is a nice ratio. It's filling everything up quite nicely, not seeing too much ground through there. And I'm actually quite pleased with that overall. Now, currently it is taking on the rotation of the ground a little bit because it's cloning onto the surface. If you're okay with that, then cool. If you don't want that, you can turn off in the cloner align clone. And now they should all face exactly the same direction. And in that case, we wouldn't need to rotate it on -90 and they'll all be facing straight up. And I think plants probably would grow straight up. So I'm going to do that method for the way we're going to continue. So that's a good setup. Let's save our scene file. And as always, I'm going to mention that you can get access to all of these scene files on Patreon if you're the type of person that likes to reverse engineer things, which is the way I like to learn. Now let's add immediately some variation into our cloner, which I will immediately also name .plant, just to keep it organized. So let's add some variation. While we have the cloner selected, I can create a MoGraph object, specifically a random effector. This can randomize our position, but we don't want that. But it will randomize our, let's start with rotation. I want to spin these around. I'm not sure what axis, but okay, yeah. H, we can spin this around 360 degrees, both positive and negative, so they should be rotated completely randomly. That adds a lot of variation instantly. And then we can add a little bit of tilt to them randomly. We can say 15, 15. That's always kind of my go-to for a little bit of variation, but it's not going to call too much attention to itself, but you could push it further. And then we can also turn on some scale. We could add some random variation between them, but I think a uniform scale is a good idea. And if we leave absolute scale turned off, as we increase this amount, they both grow and shrink. If you turn on absolute, they will only grow or only shrink. So I think a 0.5 variation on this is nice. And you can really see this does a nice little bit of breakup for us, where there's some bigger ones, some smaller ones. And with this many different plants in there, I don't think you see the repetition all that much. It looks pretty good. Quite pleased with that overall as our basic setup. I'm just going to quickly hit save over that file. Let's continue to stay organized by renaming our random effector to random rotation / scale, just to call that out for us later when we're not quite sure what all the different effectors do. Now, I think everything's set up that we need to get our basic layout, so we can start creating the more advanced features via a vertex map. To create a vertex map, I'm going to go to an object that I've made editable, in this case, the ground. Go to point mode, then go to select, set vertex weight, and I'm going to set the vertex weight to 0. So with that at 0, it is creating a vertex map for us. If we click the vertex map, we can turn on use fields. So inside by default has a freeze. We will use a freeze, but let's not use that one. I'm going to immediately delete it and make this a little bit bigger. And how are we going to start this? Well, as I was saying, let's treat this as if we're shining a light on the entire field, and that's where the plants are going to grow. Now, sadly, there is no way in Cinema for MoGraph or fields to see an actual light, but let's pretend that we are. So I'm going to create a spotlight. And before we do anything else, we get the spotlight, turn on the shadow, and then I'm going to, inside of the vertex map, create a cone field. Don't use those too often. Creating a cone field, you're going to see it's going to be shining straight down to start out with, but the correct orientation is, if we click on field, set the direction to Y or Z minus, and that's going to be currently the same orientation as our light. Dropping the cone as a child of the light, we can scoot both of them around together. So I can pull this straight up. Now, unfortunately, the cone doesn't pivot from the top point. I don't think there's a way to do it. I wish it did, but it's pretty simple to move it. And if we go to the object mode, then we can scoot these around and control it via these little dots, drag this out, make it as long as I want, move this until the first point is in the correct spot. You can see as I drag that, it moves from the front and the back. But this light's not going to be too far away. So I'll just do that. And then if I want to approximately match, I can increase this outer radius until that's matching. Doesn't need to be perfect. It's just a little, it's giving us a little more control. I can even give this a little bit more fall off from the cone, but I kind of like it being a little stronger as a little bit of fall off, but not too much. So like I said, inside of fields, if we were to click inside a vertex map, there's our cone. We can't drag in a light. You see, it's not even allowed to. So we needed to do something similar, in this case, a cone field. But like I said, we're just starting out with the concept as if we're using light on this, and then we'll see that we can apply this to anything. So that is set up. We can spin the light to be aiming straight down, which would be -90 on P. Straight down, hit E for move, scoot it up until we've got a nice radius on that. Not going overboard, but a little bit. And to start out with, I think I'll put a vibrate tag on here, an animation, right click, animation, vibrate, and then we can enable rotation and put a bunch of rotation in here. I'm not sure what a good number is, but I'm gonna try 111 on all three and drop the frequency down to 0.5. I'm not sure how quick that will be, so we'll just hit play and see what kind of movement we get. Actually, that's not too bad. Hopefully it gives us a nice amount of variation. I think we're going to need more frames, so immediately I'm going to jump our timeline up to 999. And that should give us a little more time. So if we have our vertex map selected, in fact, let's temporarily turn off our cloner. We can see that anywhere the cone is intersecting our geometry, it is creating a nice highlight. Anywhere that's full yellow is 100% power. Anywhere that's red is 0% power. Now, that's fine. Immediately, let's start applying the effect to the plants. So turning on the plant, we want to control the scale of all of those with some sort of other effector. In this case, with the cloner selected, I will make a plane effector. It's moving everything up. Don't want that, obviously. Instead, turn on scale, uniform scale, -1. So that should scale everything down to 0, which makes it not exist anymore. So goodbye, everything. Then inside of our fall off, we can limit it to certain areas by dragging in our vertex map. We don't even have to change any settings. That is now erasing things out. And the reason it's sort of inverted conceptually because the vertex map is only showing up where the cone is, but this plane effector isn't telling it to grow, it's telling it to shrink away. So we always have to invert the effect. In this case, we can do it by clicking the modifier layers and creating an invert, which will invert the overall effect. So it sees the opposite of the vertex map, and that is our final output. Now, I don't know if this actually slows us down, but I don't need color from the vertex map, so I'm going to turn that off so it's not calculating. And now we can see we get growth of the plants wherever the light is shining. And even with us having 10,000 clones, you can see that this is running at about 12, 13 frames a second. So that's pretty good. I'm very happy and impressed with the speed that we can get out of the multi-instance. So that is doing a great job of traveling around. But what's neat is we've kind of separated out this inversion and the vertex map so we can make changes to where it's going to be growing based on the changes we make in just the vertex maps fields. Now, an obvious thing we could do right away would be create a decay. And you've probably played with decay if you've played with fields at all. And if you're watching one of my tutorials, you probably tinkered with them a little bit. This will create a kind of like a tail behind it. It's remembering the power that was applied at some point. Now, if we crank it up all the way, it's going to do full strength and remember everything. So it's going to grow when it gets created and stay there forever. That's pretty neat. We could also put a pretty low amount here and it will slowly fade away. So these are neat effects we do right away. And it's almost as if it's growing where we put the light. But if we want to carry on with this light idea that we're shining a light, I don't think that these plants should grow to full power right away. The longer the light shines on it, the more the plants should grow to a greater height. So you can't do that effect with a decay. At least I haven't found a way. We can create that effect with a modifier layers freeze. This is going to view everything that comes below it and do something to it. Now, to see the effect properly, I'm going to change our blending mode to add on it. It's going to see through the object. And currently, I think it's going to behave pretty similarly to our decay. One thing you need to remember in the freeze is it tends to remember its initial state. And sometimes it reactivates. You see how this spot is still there? That's going to keep on messing with us until we hit the clear button, and it's going to forget that that had that. If ever you get a spot that doesn't seem to be quite right, jump into the freeze and clear it out. So let's see if this works right away, which right away it's not really, but let's go to our auto update and turn that checkbox on. As soon as you turn on auto update, now you can see it's behaving exactly as our decay was. But here's where a difference lies. This is adding the effect on top of whatever the cone field is doing. So let's go into our cone field and not give it full power. Currently, it is seeing full power in the center and it's fading out a little on the edge. But what if we say inside of remapping, let's give ourselves a little extra room here. No need to be that cramped. Inside of the strength, let's drop this down to be a weaker power. I'm going to do 10%. So it's only shining 10% power, but essentially, every time it's applying 10% power, it's applying it again and again and again every refresh. So the brightest point of this light or this cone fall off will have to be intersecting this area for 10 full frames to get the full power. And the freeze should remember that. So let's try this again. And now you see that we only get a little bit of growth from the plants. But then right there, well, and as the light comes back around again and shines on the spot more, it's going to grow more and more and more. It's a cool way of kind of making a little bit more solid of a growth concept where that is growing and remembering as it shines. Now, if you've used freeze, you've likely used it in the context of making something grow and spread out and apply in a bunch of different areas. We can do that still if we want to. If we change the mode from none to grow, then immediately you're going to see that is going to grow and encapsulate the entire area. The growth has completely covered everything. It does begin from where we were, and the light will shine and create some more growth points, but it's going to be very powerful to take over everything. Now, of course, that only works if this radius is larger than the spacing between your points. And right now, I think there's about 5 units between each point. So at 10, it's double that distance. We could weaken it. If we lower the strength down to 10%, then it will grow, but it's going to grow a lot slower. You see, it's 1/10 the speed as it slowly spreads out. That's very cool. We could keep that going if we want to. But here is another really cool feature that freeze is going to enable us to do. Something really neat. And that is, we want growth. We want it to keep on growing, but I don't want it to spread out. So here's my thought. Let's turn off growth for a moment and explain it. As this shines around, these are getting a little bit of power and not growing all the rest of the way. But let's say where the light shines, that we do want growth to continue to slowly happen. And we want it to grow to full length all the way up to the edge. Now, if the light shines on it, it can grow it even faster. But using the growth mode in here, it's got all the same settings that we want, except this time, let's change our radius to be 0. If the radius is down at 0, it can't spread to the next point down the line, but it will apply to itself, and it can keep on applying an additional 10% every frame, which means as soon as this light has cast a little bit of light on something, it can keep on growing. Now, do you want it to do that effect? Maybe not in all circumstances, but the ability to do this, I think, is really neat and really powerful. And that's why I want to start with the concept being a shining light, because we can separate out these ideas, and conceptually it makes more sense with a light. So with a radius of 0, let's check out what our effect ends up being. As this light shines through, we can see that this keeps on growing, and it's growing all the way to the edge, but then stops. So that's very cool. That's very powerful. It's a good way of, I don't know, it's such a neat way of keeping this alive. Now, all of these have become separate variables. We can apply a lot less strength to the initial growth. We can grab this freeze and say, okay, this is growing, but let's have it grow a lot slower. So jump that to 1%, and these will keep on growing, but very slowly. They will not spread out beyond where the light has shined, but even if the light shined a tiny little bit, it will still start growing, but as slowly as we set this variable. I think splitting the difference might be nice, up to 5%. So yeah, it's kind of neat where the light can trigger growth, or the light could be the sole thing that's adding to the overall growth. So I kind of like both ideas. Now, with the light shining and creating this motion where we want to, I want a different seed. We're seeing the same growth over and over again. Just change the random seed in our vibrate tag, and now we're going to see it sweep around and do some different path. You never know what you're going to get there, but that's working nicely. Now, when the light is shining there, it's growing pretty quickly, which, I think that this is a good speed, but keep in mind at any point you click on your cone, go to remapping, you could crank the strength up all the way, and now immediately it's like full strength. It just pretty much pops right in. But you could also lower it more, drop this down to 1%, and it's just barely going to start these growing. And the freeze, of course, will keep them growing as well. But keep in mind that combination. Now, as I said, I like 10%. I think it's a nice kind of happy medium there. Of course, these plants are just sort of snapping into their final position as the light shines on it. Let's take a look. As this sits there, it's shooting up and stopping their growth. We could add a little bit more motion on top of that if we want to. And I actually like doing that inside of the plane. Let's call the plane our growth. And inside of there, we're inverting the effect, but now we can layer things on top of it. For instance, after it inverts, I can add a delay, set delay to smooth, which it already is. It's already at 50%. And as those plants were growing pretty quickly, now when this grows quickly, you're still going to see it's going to smooth it out a little, and it's going to ease out of the growth. I think that's pretty neat. We don't need too much of that. We can lower that amount down to maybe 25%. Let's take a look. It does a really good job of showing it right here in the center point. Those grow and just smooth out a little bit so we don't hit that hard wall where they terminate themselves. And now, let's rename this delay a smooth, because now we're going to create a second delay. And this one, let's rename spring. Now, keep in mind the spring is calculating after the smooth, so it is only going to count. It's going to look at the smooth value, which means a lot of springiness might not be that strong. So change the mode to spring, and let's take a look at that again. These will grow, and hopefully we'll see we get some overshoot, and then you see they're growing, and we get a little wiggle down. The reason it's wiggling downward and stopping is we are currently clamping our values, but the spring wants to be able to shoot above 100%. So all we have to do to make that work is turn off clamp. Rewind, take a look at these plants here. And then you can see they overshoot a little bit and then settle in. That could, depending on what you're doing, I mean, keep in mind we're growing plants here, so it doesn't make sense to do that. But in a MoGraph sort of way, that's always a nice effect to layer up. And if this was something more MoGraphy or stylized or pillars growing up or spheres appearing, then that kind of wiggle can really add a lot of secondary motion. And of course, we don't need that much. I could pull this back to a lesser amount, and maybe it'll just feel like there's a little extra something in there, and it won't call too much attention to itself. So yeah, we've got all of those different effects layered up, and keep in mind, I mean, this should just be a fun toolbox of all these different things you can apply and make everything just do whatever you want it to do, where this is randomly rotating around and creating growth of these plants. There are so many different effects that you could layer up and make this do so many different things. So let's tinker around with a couple other ones. I'm going to save this. This will be 1C. Couple different cool details I want to throw out there. First of all, these are growing really nicely, but we can always go back to our vertex map, and the freeze currently doesn't have any kind of radius, so it does terminate on the edge. If you want to, at any point, we can increase this radius to 5 or 10 if we want it to jump 2 units. I'm going to jump, let's go to 10. And now this will slowly spread out as well, and I can just keep it alive and just a little bit more motion happening on the edge. You have that option. Of course, you can make it a lot stronger. I can jump this to 11, and now it's going to start spreading out very quickly, of course, based on where we originally grew, but eventually it will cover everything. Stylistically, just keep in mind that that is an option. I don't want that to do that right now. Then this is currently growing all of those plants, but look at how easy it is if we select our plain growth. Let's turn off that invert that we've been using. I'm going to deselect the vertex map tag so we can see it. If I turn off the invert, we're not inverting the original vertex map anymore, but all the same effects are applied, which means everything is fully grown at the beginning. So if I hit play, this actually becomes something that's erasing out the effect, and it will partially shrink some of these plants away, but they'll continue to shrink down until they're fully grown or fully erased. So we can do the opposite effect just by turning off one checkbox, and we can get the perfect inverse of the effect. And that just looks really, really neat. And of course, this could be growing and spreading out the erasing of the objects. Very, very powerful. Now, that's why I want to use this cone idea, or this light, so we could be shining a light in various places, but it doesn't need to be limited to that. That's just a foundation for us to start out with. So now I'm going to turn off the light and the cone, even make them invisible because we don't need to see them. Something I think could be cool here is let's treat this more like a lawnmower. So inside of the vertex map, we're feeding in this cone field, but instead of cone field, let's feed in a brand new box field. And it could have any amount of fall off that we want. T for scale, shrink that way down. I'm going to rewind to 0 so we should see something a little more accurate. I'm not sure how big our lawnmower is or what our overall scale is. It doesn't matter for my purposes, but make sure you give this whatever fall off you want it to have. Grab the inner box, I think. Oop, it's just not cooperating, so I'm going to grab the inner offset, and we can crank this up to 0 and 100% strength, or you can give a nice big long transition. But let's just say this is a lawnmower that's going to be going around chopping the lawn. It might be a better idea to make this a sphere, but I'm going to leave it as a box. And I'm not going to overthink this. Let's make it a little extra tall and just create some keyframes. But keep in mind, you could create a spline, make an entire lawnmower, have it go traveling around. In this case, I shall just go to our top view, middle mouse button, so you can go to your 4 views, go to the top one. And I'm just going to pick a couple of places to keyframe this. I want it to only keyframe position, so I can turn off all these other parameters, only record on position. And actually, something that's neat is if you turn on this auto keyframe, and I'm going to hit record right now, it should hopefully record the position only of this box. And I can go and start jumping to new times and just move this. And because I have auto keyframe on, when it detects a change in this moving around, it'll automatically create a new keyframe. So I can keep on jumping to new positions. Let's go a little bit. Actually, I shouldn't have gone that far. So let me go back to the previous one, and I'll just scoot to this corner right there and go 50 later. And I'm just going to let it zigzag a little bit. I'll travel up here and jump a little bit more. We're just doing this randomly. Somebody's doing a terrible job of mowing the lawn. They'll go to this point and then go diagonally up to that point. And we'll do one last one here where they go up to here. So we'll just see what that ends up doing. All those keyframes have been applied. Make sure you turn off your auto keyframing. Luckily, it does that nice big red outline so you don't accidentally forget. Now that's not gonna look right in the beginning. And let's make sure that this cube, the cube is underneath the freeze. I think I set it to normal. It doesn't really matter, but let's keep that organized. So rewind to 0, and that should reset quite nicely. And we've already turned off the invert, so this should be erasing things out as we go. So this can go around and be chopping away all these plants, this grass, as it goes, just shrinking them down. Of course, maybe we don't want them to go all the way down to 0. We could limit how much the overall effect is getting applied. The simplest way in this case would be going to our plant growth, and this is just getting applied to our cloner at full strength, but we could drop this down to 50%. And now when it gets applied full, we go, no, it's not full. It goes to 50%. Now, keep in mind, this isn't really chopping the plants. It's scaling them down to 0, but you can see how this can start getting applied in additional ways that are pretty cool. I really think there's a lot of potential for this to get applied to lots of different things. And we could even turn both on. Now we should get the lawnmower and the light. Actually, let's make sure that in here, we have to turn that on and add them together. And now we should have the light shining around and the lawnmower going around, and they'll combine. So very, very nice, very fun ways of combining these. Now give that another save. Come on, save file, ABCD. Now let's make this a little more applicable to the motion graphics world. Let's say that you want this to be drawing only where there's text, or maybe get erased out only where there's text. Pretty straightforward with MoGraph, of course. Create a text object, hit R for rotate, lay it flat on the ground. I wouldn't mind having a slightly beefier font here. So I'm going to we'll start out by scooting in the air, moving in the correct position. It actually doesn't have to be perfectly aligned with the ground. We just want it to be flat. Let's find, I know that we can get some nice Futura here that always look nice. So I'll grab a Futura bold, nice and blocky. That should fill that in quite nicely. And inside the vertex map, actually I'll turn off the plants just temporarily so we can see this. If we drop in the text in the very top, I want to see what it's doing. You see it's going to look super crazy. But clicking on the text, I can say I want the spline shape to be treated as a mask. And it's currently along Z, and it's local Z. So that actually is the proper one. It's projecting up and down because it is on Z. So you see that becomes a mask projected straight down into it. And we can do whatever we want with this mask. Also, you can change your distance. So I can increase and fade out if I want to. And you can even turn that to inside, and we could fade it out into the interior also if we want to. In this case, I'm just going to leave it full power as 0 on distance. So this should apply onto everything as some sort of multiply or mask. In this case, I could just say, let's multiply everything by it. And only where everything lives is that going to exist. So I'm not sure what the end result of this will be, but let's hit play. And as the light shines through, those become valid areas. And of course, the lawnmower can go through and erase out certain areas. That is becoming the acceptable spots. In addition, we could click on our freeze. In this case, I'm going to click on the freeze, and let's add some of that growth back in. So give it a radius of 10. And anywhere this touches, you can see it's going to start spreading out because I want to make sure all the text eventually gets hit. So now we can let those start doing their growth as the light or the lawnmower is going to bounce into them, and the growth should take over the rest, even if it's very slowly. So now turning back on the plants, deselect everything, we can now see that this will, and I'll even hide the text for a moment. We can see that this will erase out those as they are struck and erase them out. And of course, we can click on the plane growth, and in fall off, turn on the invert. And now they will only grow in these locations, slowly spreading out if we want to, or anywhere only they intersect via the lawnmower or that window. Of course, we could, by window, I meant the light. We can feed anything into this vertex map. Of course, we can mask it out with any text that we want. We could make a linear field that just transitions from one corner to another corner. We have just complete control over exactly how this spreads out. But the very basics of this freeze, allowing edges to slowly fade up, is really cool and powerful. And that is a part I wanted to focus on there. So with that wrapped up, we will save it one more time. Okay, that is the meat of this tutorial, but a couple extra details I'd like to do. To start out with, I'd like to add a little more life to this plant scene that we have. To start out with, let's get rid of this mask. I don't want to limit it to the text. And then let's re-invert again. In our plant growth, no more invert, so we see lots of plants everywhere, and they'll slowly get erased. So now we just see more going on. I'd like there to be a wind effect on all of these plants blowing around. There's a lot of different ways to go about doing that type of thing. We're going to do the simplest possible method, and that is selecting our cloner plant, creating a random effector. It's going to push everything all over the place, but I just want this to do a bunch of rotation. I'm not sure which angles I want, so let's try and lay this down. And that seems good. It's going to lay it down its side. And well, let's see which one spins it. I don't want to spin. And it seems like this top one, yeah. So it's H that spins it. So these other two, I want them to be able to lie down like 90 degrees. But you see, when I say lie down 90 degrees, they're kind of going all over the place. There's a couple reasons for that. First of all, let's make sure that it's not randomly applying this everywhere. I want it to be noise-based. Now, by using a random effector directly and not a random field, we don't really get a bunch of those cool noise options that we usually do. But in this case, it's pretty simple. So cranking our noise scale to 1000, we're going to get a larger overall effect. And there's already some animation speed. So if I hit play, we're going to see hopefully a lot of motion here. The speed is probably a little fast, so I'm going to drop it to 25%. And now you can see everything's a little bit alive. Everything is moving around very randomly, but it's very random. And we just made a very, very large noise. So why is it so random? Well, it's all about the order of operations. To begin with, I'm going to rename this random.wind so we can see it very clearly. And inside of that cloner, we can take a look at the effectors tab and see the order of operations. So what's happening first is they're randomly being scaled and rotated, and then they're growing, and then they're deciding how they should tilt over. So if we want these to tilt in a slightly more uniform manner, as if there's like a big gust of wind and they should all sort of blow together, we just have to calculate before they got randomly rotated. So I'll just scoot this up to be the first one to calculate, and immediately everything changes a little bit. Deselect it all, and let's take a look at the beginning. And now you can see that we get a more uniform movement of these plants drifting one direction and then the other. And the noise scale is going to be what determines how big that is. We have our animation speeds. I'll double this just so we can see it a little bit more blatantly. We can see this drifting one way and the other way. So yeah, the speed, the scale, the smaller you make this, then the more individual they'll start looking. And that, I mean, actually that's pretty cool. This is like a very kind of windy day, but a little bit more, jump it to 500, and now we get more uniformity. And you could go huge, jump to 5,000, and this whole field will probably be doing a very similar thing at any given time. It's not unusual for me to do a very large one, so everything is kind of doing something together. And I like that. And then let's create a second wind, copy and paste it. Make sure inside of the plant, we can apply that one as well. And the second one, I'll rename this wind small. And the smaller one, drop that down to a very nice 200. And now we should get a bigger overall feeling of motion, and then a small one layering up on top. And you see how nicely all of these are moving together. So once again, just something cool, a little extra detail, bringing a little bit of life to this. So give that a quick save. Now, I've been mentioning this more and more lately in these videos, but it's very important that when you're following a tutorial to make it your own somehow. Employers are going to know the source material. They're going to see the same thing again and again. If this isn't your demo reel, then employers or your peers are going to recognize the source. So the more you can make it your own, the more different it can be, the better. And these techniques should be applicable in lots of different places. Just as a super basic one, we can grab all of the plants that we've been feeding in here and delete them entirely. Of course, the simple thing, we can feed different plants in. I'm going to grab the clover leaves, the clover flower, the dandelion plants, drag these all in, and let's swap those in instead. Select all those, drag them into our cloner. Now, obviously, that's just swapping out different plants, but instantly, at least that's different. And if I rewind, everything should continue to work. Even with all this geometry, it just looks really nice, and these will get grown or erase out, depending if we invert it or not. So that's kind of neat. But we can swap any geometry we want in anywhere. But the way it grows, what it's applied to, there are so many different possibilities. And to continue that idea, I have a different scene file I just wanted to pop open and show quickly. Is instead of applying this to plants, all I did was take the exact same concept. And in this cloner, actually, we were playing with the idea of dust, but instead, I went into the content browser and found that there's a bunch of knives. So I dropped the knives in here. And the only difference is instead of them growing up, I'm having them animate on Y. So they're traveling downward as they grow. So as this light shines around, we should hopefully see when the light catches a particular spot, it's going to have knives come shooting in and stick into the ground. And eventually that's going to be filling in some text and has all those same abilities to grow and spread and shine a light in the spot. And now there's knives flying in. It's the same concept. I've barely changed anything about it, but this would be completely unrecognizable to a bunch of plants growing from a tutorial. And now we've got knives flying in and filling in the ground. It's really cool being able to play with these resources. And when it comes to tutorials, I like everybody having access to as much as possible. So this being in the content browser is very helpful. So check out the other models in there. It's really fun. Make it your own. Come up with crazy ideas. We got a bunch of knives up here in the sky because they slowly fly in. There they all are. They're just hanging out up here on Y. Could probably optimize that somehow, but I think it's pretty fun. I just like seeing these knives fly in. Think of all the different angles we could render this from. You could do a couple shots. I mean, well, first of all, you could look at them from the ground. That's kind of crazy. But we could be looking up and just seeing all these knives come flying in. Oh, okay, we're dead. And then, I don't know. It's just a lot of fun. Every shot that we could render from here, pull them in from different angles. It's just great. I love all the possibilities. As always, I really enjoyed putting that together. I think there's a lot of fun techniques. I've been thinking about this one for a little while and ways it would be applicable. And I think there's a lot of potential, as always, in this. So make it your own, make it fun. If you liked this, a like would be appreciated, of course. And if you really liked it, if this was something cool, helpful, you learned something, if it was useful for a client, I have a Patreon set up. In addition to supporting me and the kind of work I'm trying to get out there, you also get access to the scene files. You get access to bonus live streams. I'm currently doing bonus live streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and sometimes even Monday. So way too much live streaming. Of course, there is the main live stream on Wednesdays, Rocket Lasso Live, where I answer questions from the YouTube and Twitch audience. And I have no idea what's coming, and we just try and figure it out together. And sometimes the cool ideas from that end up as these big full tutorials. So it's really fun. It's a really great way of getting sources from all over the place that I wouldn't even necessarily think about. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next live stream or the next tutorial. Oh, and make sure you @ me if you create anything cool based on any of these tutorials. So just at Rocket Lasso on all of the different things. Make sure you leave a comment if you have any suggestions or ideas, anything I could have done better, or anything you might have liked. That should wrap this up. Thanks, everybody, and see you next time. Bye-bye. I lost it right there at the end. Oh, it was so good up to there.